Good day, everyone. Very excited to be here and talking to all of you. In this session today, we're going to talk a little bit about one of the most important steps in your data mesh journey, which is managing people and process change. I'm here today with Kris. Just a little bit about ourselves before we get started. I am a senior delivery principal within the global data strategy practice at Slalom. I'm an engineer and an architect at hand, and I've worked on various data modernization initiatives across different industries with different clients. While technology is a core part of everything to do with data mesh, I have also seen that we need to place a great amount of emphasis on a shift in culture and processes to get the most value out of your initiative. I'm going to hand over to Kris to introduce himself.
Kris Karaikudi, I'm a director with the Global Data Strategy Group here at Slalom. A little over 20 plus years of experience in helping clients create value across sales, service, and marketing. Extremely excited to be talking about process change and culture around transformative journeys, especially with data mesh. And let's go right into it. We wanted to start off with giving you a little bit of an introduction to Slalom if you haven't heard of us. Slalom is a purpose-led global business and technology consulting company. And at our core, we are advisors, strategists, and engineers focused on people above all else. We are driven to do what's right and help clients realize their vision. And we believe in generating success collaboratively, leaving your organization stronger after every engagement and building trust for the next big challenge. And what we wanted to kind of talk about today around data mesh in the next slide here is if you start thinking about what data mesh is and what the challenges around implementing data mesh is, although it involves a technical architecture that can be built, it is more an organizational and cultural approach to data ownership and governance. We have seen in many of our experiences working with clients in the digital transformative journeys that adopting data mesh requires not only technology, but more importantly, a cultural and organizational change. And Slalom's approach to modernization, as Zhamak Dehghani lays out in her book, data mesh concept is based on 4 key principles: domain-oriented ownership, data as a product, self-serve data infrastructure, and federated governance. Now, Slalom's approach to modernization extends to data mesh implementations to key areas that align the core principles of data mesh, and we urge our clients to focus on. Starting with the bold vision, what is the strategic vision that the organization has and how can data mesh help accomplish it? Access and transparency. How do you measure success and maintain accountability for your outcomes? And from a guardianship perspective, what decisions and actions need to be governed and how? And the 2 other areas here that we're going to kind of hone in the rest of our time on, data literacy as well as ways of working around how culture and collaboration encourage or discourage outcomes and what sort of capabilities, both on the business side as well as on the IT side, that should be stood up as building blocks to help have the right mix of people, process, technology, and data. As you have a fair understanding now of our approach to data mesh-driven modernization, what we're going to do now is to focus on the 2 areas, especially the ways of working, especially around people and process, that touches more on the pillars of guardianship, literacy, and ways of working. I'll invite Sharjeel to walk us through that in the coming 20 minutes. Sharjeel?
Thank you, Kris. That was an amazing introduction. Appreciate it. So you have a little bit of an understanding of how Slalom looks at modernization. But as Kris mentioned, we're going to look at specific pillars of that today. What you see on the screen right now is a typical data mesh journey, and emphasis is on the word typical, right? So there's going to be deviations. Some organizations do things in a slightly different way. But the key things that are part of this cycle that we call is starting with ideation generally. In the context of setting up your data mesh journey, there's generally a period where you're ideating to see what's the best fit for you. You're looking at generating buy-in, evaluating the benefits of data mesh overall. The next phase, once you kind of set on your data mesh that hey, this is the right thing for us, is actually going into the build phase. where you're setting up the underlying platform, the underlying tools for your data mesh. And this, of course, is vital to making sure that you can support vast amounts of data as your business generates them as you go along. The governance step is very important, and a lot of organizations generally start looking at this after the build stage, but it's something that you can do in parallel as well, or even start looking at before you start looking at building out your platform. And this is around making sure that, as your organization shifts to a new operating model, a new way of working, you start looking at changing your processes to meet you there as well. You want to make sure that your processes align with data mesh philosophy to help you get the most out of them. The last bit, and this is what we're going to be focusing on a lot in this talk today, is around adoption, right? And I think all of us have been there. We've seen initiatives where you set up data platforms that start being used, and it's not just about data platforms. It could be any product. I think one of the biggest challenges internally, whenever you're coming up with new tooling or a new way of working, is the change aspect, making sure that you can ignite sustained cultural transformation. Emphasis on the word sustained, right? It's not just about, hey, I've started something, I'm going to spend, the first month trying to show people how it's done. It's about making sure that people actually adopt it and carry it forward and becomes the way to do things going forward. So that's, those are the 4 things that we see typically happen within a data mesh journey. We'll spend time on the adopt side, as I said, but I do want to kind of quickly walk through some of these other things there as well. Ideate, build, and govern, just specifically from a data mesh and perspective, and how each of these areas you need to still focus on bringing some change to how people work, right? So, for instance, on the ideate side, across most organizations, a lot of data work historically has been viewed as an IT initiative. Hey, the IT team is going to come in, build data pipelines, and at times even, in addition to ingesting and processing data, they're at times responsible for building dashboards and reports. Data mesh requires a fundamental shift in that, right? Because technology, they still have a huge role to play, but business really needs to be an equal partner. And that's kind of a requirement or a prerequisite to imagining IT initiatives as they've been, always seen as data products. And all of this, it starts with data product ownership, right? Business needs to own the data and the products that are built on top. They need to understand where the data is being brought from. They need to ensure its quality. They need to know what it can be used for. And that last bit, they need to know what it can be used for, is very important when it comes to ideation. They need to be part of that ideation process. They need to be part of the opportunity mining, and they need to own the paths to value. And lastly, just one thing that I wanted to add here, right? As you kind of move towards a data mesh model, sometimes, if you're not careful, you could start to devolve into data silos where you have several different autonomous teams that, just think, oh, all I need to care about is what I'm doing. But this is where it's so important for business to have a stake in this whole process. They need to maintain cohesion across different data products. As Kris was talking about earlier, right? Everything that you build, it has to be aligned with your organization's bold vision. What is the strategy overall for the organization? What is it that we're moving towards? And all of the products that you ideate and you start building, you need to make sure that they're aligned with your organization's bold vision. The next part is around, building. Hey, we've decided we're going to do this. We know what data products we want to build. What are the changes that you want to see in the build process as well? Again, it's a very important point that keeps coming up. Business needs to co-own the capabilities that are built out as part of your data mesh setup. They need to be owners in the whole build process as well. And typically what we've seen is that, roles such as that of an agile coach becomes very important, because they can bring your organization to your new ways of working, to your new operating model, and help coach people along the way to make sure they understand their roles and responsibilities and are able to deliver what you would expect of them. The last thing that I want to kind of talk about, I'm not going to go into the tools and technology that is needed here. We've gone through that in some of the other sessions that have happened. But just remember, one of the key things there is that you bring tooling to support your mesh vision, right? And you need to build something according to your chosen operating model. Even though you're going back to that point around, the risk of data silos popping up, even though you want to have autonomous teams that are, delivering changes rapidly, you want to make sure that everybody understands that they need to adhere to organizational standards and controls, right? And this is something that during the build phase, you need each of your team members, whether they're the business, whether they're developers, to understand very well that everything that we are building, sure, we have the license to build quickly, but it needs to be in accordance with whatever the organization guidelines are that have been chosen as part of, setting up the operating model or the tooling. The next bit. So this is also one of the key things. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on governance because it's a huge topic, and we can talk about this for a long time. But I think it's important to recognize that you have to design the right processes. This is very, very important to making sure that you support your data mesh and your data as a product mentality, right? At the core, you need to think about what processes need to be in place to support new data product creation. Not just the creation, but how those data products are governed and how they are consumed. So which is basically these three key things that we're seeing over here: products, new data products, ownership and governance, and how you consume that data. So when we talk about new data products, or a team that's thinking about, hey, I want to build something new, what do they generally start with? Most importantly, you want to make sure that there are ways in your new data mesh system where all the required dependencies are met, right? So if you want people to start developing, adding value quickly, while making sure that they're still compliant with organizational controls, you need to make sure that you have the right accelerators to sort those dependencies out for them, have the baseline set up, the boilerplate, the infrastructure. For instance, a standardized way of provisioning environments, right? You want to make sure that if somebody wants to come in and build something new, they can just say, hey, I want a new environment, and they're ready to go. Aside from that, when you're building new products, we talked about this a little bit already, but you want to make sure that you have cohesion between different data products. A simple example would be if you have a team that is building out a sales-related data product, and they rely on customer information for that. Instead of going, and starting building their own customer data set or master, they need to look outside, see if that exists already as a data product that they can consume. This kind of promotes that collaboration across the organization and prevents future data quality issues as well. The last bit is, as you're building a new product, you already need to be thinking about, hey, how is this going to be used in the wider organization? How is this data going to be discoverable? How do I tell people, advertise to people that, what does this data have? And you need to start, as an example, as you're building something out new, you want to make sure that you have, let's say, the right metadata as part of the data set as well, which shows the lineage, where that data is originating from, what kind of processing is happening. That can help downstream consumers at a later point make decisions about whether they want to use that data and how they can use that data. The second bit is around ownership and governance, right? I'm not going to go a lot into this because we talked a little bit about operating model in other sessions, but you just need to make sure that whatever model you've decided on, you still need to have the concept of data ownership in place. You need to have data stewards in place that can make sure that your data is trustable. You have metrics in place to judge the quality of your data. You have standardized security policies, all of the stuff that you would need at a centralized level to make sure you're getting the most out of your data, right? And one of the most important things, I think this is something that a lot of us recognize, but it might not always get done right, is around having some kind of centralized data catalog. I'm saying centralized data catalog, and I think a lot of us immediately jump to what are some of the tools out there that can do the job for us. And that, I think, is a fair way to look at it. But I just wanted to make it clear, this is not about a tool particularly. It's really about making sure there's just some way within the organization that shows where is data available or what data is available within the organization. You could even have decentralized catalogs that kind of bubble up to a central view that show people what's available. It's really just, it's a mindset again, right? So that's the important thing that I want to highlight here. And the last thing on the governance side is around data consumption. So as you build new data products, you need to think about how are these data sets going to be made available to different consumers. And again, this could be like, hey, every team is going to choose its own consumption method. Yeah, I want to make my data available by API, but no, I want to send it via FTP. To me, there can definitely be a degree of flexibility in how data is published to downstream consumers. But again, there need to be standardized processes within the organization so that everybody can rely on, let's say, like a digital mesh or APIs that enable access to data seamlessly across different products. And you always know that there is a standardized integration pattern when it comes to it, when it comes to getting data. And to that extent, and as well, we need to make sure we have the right workflows in place to grant people access to data. You want to make it easy for people to get and use data. So if I want access to the customer's data set, I should just be able to go and raise a simple request somewhere that goes to a data owner who proves, hey, Sharjeel is okay, he should be able to see this customer data set. And I just go ahead and look at that particular data. So this is just a little bit about the governance. And now we're going to jump into adoption. So we've gotten a data mesh tooling set up, we've gotten some processes in place. How do we actually start driving this change across the organization? Before we kind of go into how we do this, I just wanted to take a moment to kind of align and for all of us to think about, the fact that we have different people within the organization. There are different personality types, and different people react differently to change, right? So you'll have within your organization, you'll have promoters, people who are going to be very excited about data mesh and all the possibilities that it brings with it. And they will want to jump on board as soon as they possibly can. They'll be nudging you about what's ready, what's not ready, when can they start, working with things. There will be people who are a little less, excited. They're more passive. They don't have a strong positive or negative view about it. A lot of the times, this is usually driven by not having a great understanding of what data mesh is bringing to them. So they may not really know if it's going to be positive for them, negative for them. They're just like, okay, it's just one more initiative amongst a lot of other initiatives. What's new? And the last bit is, detractors, people who are actively negative about the change that's happening. And this, I don't mean to say this in a negative way, right? Like people who have these kinds of opinions, they have the right to have these opinions, right? And they might even be right. It really depends on the situation, and it's for us to empathize and understand, and we'll go into this in a bit, why those negative reactions exist and what we can do to alleviate them. Of course, for a successful change, for a sustained change within the organization, you would hope that you have as many promoters as possible within the organization. But to get to that state, to change a lot of people who may be passive or detractors into promoters, it requires a great understanding of people's behaviors, especially with regards to their role, and making sure that they feel involved and they feel heard, and we make sure that we are able to solve their problems within the new paradigm that we're setting up. And this is where it comes to a very important point, which is around behaviors, right? So I'm just listing out a few different personas within your organization that might be impacted by this change, but this is just an example, right? Like as you move to data mesh, there are people that are going to be impacted by it. There are people whose ways of working is going to change, right? So for instance, data architects, they're going to have to do things differently. Product owners are going to have to look at things differently. They need to move to a data product mindset. Developers will need to work differently. Business users need to interact and work with, within a data mesh system differently as well. The reason why this point is so important is to drive change across the organization in a sustained manner, you need to understand the behaviors of all these people and more within your organization, right? How do they behave today? What are some of the things that they do to get their job done? And this is a very, very important thing. We'll go into some examples of desired behaviors in a second. But I just want to pause here for one particular thing, right? Like in my experience, in our experience, what we've typically noticed is that people start looking at adoption at the tail end of the change, right? And it's a lot more driven by, okay, look, we've got the platform ready, we've got everything that we need. How do we get people to start using it? And this goes back to when I said typical cycle, that the four things that we looked at: ideate, build, govern, and adopt. But maybe not ideal always, right? Not that there's like you can't make things work here, but there are other ways of doing it as well. And this goes back to design thinking principles. A lot of this has to do with empathizing. And if you start looking at these behaviors even before your technology solution is designed, like how do my data architects behave today? You can design systems that make sure that we try and build something that will help them in their jobs, and still encourage their existing behaviors, or at least have something in keep in mind that the changes we're going to bring, they need to help these people. For instance, if we talk about data architects today, you probably want them to shift from thinking to build for like posterity to start building data products that are incremental, that are experimental, that you can take to market quickly and get feedback. So you want to kind of change their mentality a little bit as well. They need to start shifting from architecting these huge data platforms for the organizations and pipelines within those platforms, to start thinking about what are the key capabilities that I need to provide as part of this whole mesh ecosystem that people can reuse and get going as quickly as possible. They also, just as kind of a requisite or prerequisite to moving to a data mesh world where you are autonomous teams, you need to start having a broader understanding of how things work. You can't just be focused on a specific area. You need to know how everything works, from sourcing data all the way through consumption. Similarly, for product owners, you want to start getting them into the mentality of thinking of data as a product. It's something that's living and breathing. They need to think about quality. They need to think about the users of their data. They also need to think about cross-domain dependency. So they need to always think about how do I, like, this is just a simple example, but basically, if I built a data product, tomorrow I can't just go in and change that at a whim, right? I need to think about how that product is made available, just like you would any physical product that you've made available or any other technology product that you've made available to your end users. This is a product that's available to your internal users. And if you're changing something about it, you need to keep in consideration backward compatibility. You need to make sure that people who are using it today can still continue to use it. You have the right, change management processes in place around that as well. Developers, key thing here that we've noticed a lot is you need to start creating a culture where developers become a bit more T-shaped, right? So they need to start thinking beyond just, hey, I do Java, and they need to start developing a more holistic skill set. They need to start kind of adopting a DevSecOps mindset, where they are responsible for all the delivery from start to production, really, right? And that's a pretty fundamental mindset shift as well, and it takes a while. The last bit is around business users, right? So we talked about how business needs to become a key partner in this whole process. And a big part of that is embracing a self-serve mentality, going out, getting things done yourself, instead of just being like, okay, I need to go talk to, or I'm dependent on a particular technology team. Those are the exact things that we're trying to change with the data mesh approach, and business needs to be able to leverage the best or leverage the most value out of that data mesh system as well. So these are just some examples of behaviors, right? These are some examples of desired behaviors. This helps us to drive that conversation around what needs to change. But behaviors can be kind of driven by process changes. You can make people behave a certain way. But what you really need to look at is habits, right? Behaviors drive habits. If you do something often enough, it becomes a habit. And habits are basically repetitive patterns of what people think, they say, and do. And these are, the key ingredient to making sure that a change is successful. Like, this is the major reason why a lot of initiatives fail from a change perspective, because they run counter to habits. They don't communicate the value of things in the right way. They don't get people to change their habits, basically. And changing habits, it's not a trivial task. There are ways that we can go about it, and I'm going to talk about those in a second. But I just want, to make sure that everybody here understands that it's habits that we're trying to change. Right? Change is only going to succeed and become permanent if we can change people's behaviors or desired behaviors into habits that, just keep them going on a day-to-day basis. So how do we go about and drive this change? We talked a little bit about behaviors and habits. I'm going to go into that in a second, but just at the very start, right? Change is a process, but it's a choice as well, right? You can't enforce change on people because it's never going to work the way you think it is. You need actual wholehearted commitment from your people to make sure that your vision comes to fruit, in a sense. And effectively, what you need is people to choose the change. You need people to want that change, and you need them to recognize why that change is helpful for them. Just, a key part here is to think about how change is not like a big bang event that happens overnight and you're like, okay, it's done. It's a transitional thing, and you need to treat it as such. You need to think about how people's lives are being impacted, and you need to kind of walk them through that process, through that change, to get them to that end state. And a big part of this is a communication plan. You need to be communicating upfront. You need to be communicating. Like, if I take an example of a client, we were developing a chatbot. They started communicating months upfront to their organization. It was an internal chatbot for HR-related stuff. And they started communicating months upfront that, look, this is coming, getting people ready, and then following it up with when that bot was actually available, actually getting people to use it, telling them, hey, it's available, this is how you can use it. So having a communication plan created upfront, it's very important. It defines how we're going to communicate to people, the frequency, the cadence, all of that stuff. Aside from that, communicating is one thing, but then getting people across, like, a lot of people will just not know how to use the new system. And it's for us to make sure that they know how that happens. So a training plan, for instance, is fundamental to getting this done. We were talking about developers a little while ago from a very recent client project, right? We set up a data mesh. It requires changes to how developers go ahead and write code. And some of this was they need to be kind of responsible for the end-to-end pipelines as well, and provisioning, for instance, infrastructure via Terraform as an example. And this is something that a lot of them hadn't done before. And then you need to kind of give them those skills. You need to train them. And this is technical training that I'm talking about, but this applies equally to things like agile trainings. So these are things that we need to keep in mind on getting people to that end state. The last bit that, like, we talked a little bit about behaviors already, but just to kind of reinforce this, there are ways for us to start changing people's behaviors and habits. And one of the key things that we do there is to incentivize change. You want to make sure that you have the right incentives in place to get people to that desired state. These are things like, social incentives. So you should exhibit, hey, look, this is what other people, you show what other people are doing well, and people look at what their peers are doing well as well and try to do the same thing. You can also, have more immediate rewards, like, hey, you did this, great job, well done, here you go. Like a little award, whether it's a Starbucks voucher or something else. And the last bit is around monitoring progress, right? So as you kind of go through that process of change, you want to make sure that you're tracking against what you're moving towards. And you can actually tie actions to what we're trying to change, right? So the purpose of the change, you need to be able to tie that directly to what you're asking people to do. And that's very important to make sure that people are, at the same baseline as you are. I'm going to talk a little bit more about incentivizing, because that's a very important part to driving change. There are, different types of rewards that you can do. There's like external rewards, like an example that I just gave around a Starbucks voucher that you can send to people. But what we really want to kind of hone in on or spend the most time is around intrinsic rewards, right? What is an intrinsic reward? An intrinsic reward is basically that feeling that you get from doing something that you wanted to do successfully, right? It's just based on yourself, like you are feeling pride in your work, or you feel like you've grown from whatever you're doing, or you get more trust from your leaders within the organization. And this kind of intrinsic reward, it's immensely valuable, because it has that immediate feedback cycle of, hey, look, I've done something, I liked it, I got recognition for it, I actually enjoy doing this. And that kind of starts that whole cycle of, okay, I'm going to do more of this. And then, slowly, gradually, those new behaviors that you want from those people, they start turning into habits. And this is fundamental, right? Like, how do you drive these kinds of intrinsic rewards? A lot of this comes down to your leadership, which I'll talk about in a bit more. But you want to make sure that people feel valued for the work they're doing. You make sure they're recognized at the right time. The key with intrinsic goals over some, the extrinsic ones that we just mentioned earlier, is that you don't need to do this every time they do something right? It's really about periodically giving them the feedback to make sure that they're happy, they keep going with what they're doing. And this brings me to my last slide, really, which is around how leaders are so important to this whole change process. If you've got leaders in place that you brought on early into the process, like you brought them in when you were thinking about data mesh and how that's going to impact their teams, they know what the value is that can bring to them and to their team, then you're kind of doing the job right? You want to make sure that your leaders are empowered to communicate, and they know how to communicate. They know how to show value that this data mesh is going to bring to them and to their team. And it's very important, because if the leaders are communicating right, then the team is going to be very well aligned with the vision, the bold vision of the whole initiative. You also need leaders to roll up their sleeves, right? They need to be leading from the front. They need to show people how things are done. They need to be allocating resources to make sure that people are actually, learning more about the new ways of working, but then they're also kind of spending time to do things the new way. And that's how you kind of upskill your team as well, while also showing that, look, this is important. I'm doing it. Therefore, it's important for the entire team. It's important for the entire organization. And the last bit is around that reinforcement. We spoke about this briefly, but leaders are your direct line to your people, right? They are the ones who can reward people, whether it's a pat for a job well done, or whether it's recognition in a wider forum, or getting people to showcase what they've done. They are that key pillar for you to rely on, and you want to make sure that they are there and they're reinforcing their employees, and they're providing timely recognition to make sure that you reinforce that change overall. I'm going to end this here, right? And I think that's the key thing that I kind of just wanted to end with on how to drive change. I wanted to thank you all for your time. It was really nice talking. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We'd be very happy to help.